Hey friends, I'm Richard Topping and I'm the president of the Vancouver School of Theology, and I want to welcome you to the annual Merton Society Lecture. VST is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. The land it is situated on has always been a place of learning for the Musqueam, who for millennia have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next on the site. Tonight, we're so glad to host this annual lecture in partnership with the Merton Society. We do this each year in conjunction with a course on some aspect of Merton's work in the VST Summer School. It's been a pleasure through the years to work with Reverend Judith Hardcastle, who is the minister of St. Andrew's United Church in North Vancouver and program director of the Merton Society, to arrange for this lecture. This evening, it's our pleasure to welcome Professor Christine Bochen. Following her lecture, there will be opportunity for questions, and you can ask your questions using the Q&A or chat functions on Zoom, which are right on the bottom of the screen. We're grateful tonight to Iman Zantrodo for managing our Zoom platform for this engagement. And I want to welcome to our panel, Dr. Michael Higgins, who is president of the Merton Society and interim principal of St. Mark's College and president of Corpus Christi, and my colleague with whom I work in the same building. We're also grateful to Reverend Dr. Jason Biasi, who is Butler Professor of Preaching and Biblical Interpretation at Vancouver School of Theology, and who will present your questions to Professor Bochen. I want to ask now Reverend Hardcastle if she would kindly introduce our speaker for this evening.
Well, it is truly a pleasure to introduce Christine to you tonight. Christine and I met about 20 years ago at some Merton event that neither of us can remember exactly where it was or when or what it was about. What I do remember are the many memorable moments we have shared throughout these years that have cemented our friendship. Let me tell you about some of Christine's academic achievements. Christine is Professor Emerita of Religious Studies at Nazareth College in Rochester, New York. She edited the fourth volume of Merton's Letters of Courage for Truth. She edited volume 6 of Thomas Merton's journals, Learning to Love. She co-edited the Thomas Merton Encyclopedia with William Shannon and Patrick O'Connell. Orbis Books published Christine's book, Thomas Merton Essential Writings, which was part of their Modern Spiritual Masters series. And she has contributed many scholarly articles to the Merton Seasonal and the Merton Annual. Christine has led retreats and workshops and courses about Merton's life and thought all over the world. Well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly in Canada, United States, England, and Italy. She's a deeply spiritual person who practices what Merton preaches in a delightfully authentic way. There is no one who can tell us more about what Merton has to say about dancing joyfully in life's waters than Christine Bochen. Over to you, Christine.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Richard and Judith, for your warm welcome. I am grateful to the administration and staff of VST for the opportunity to be teaching this week, and always to the Thomas Merton Society of Canada for the work done and the joy that I have experienced with all of my friends in the Society. I want to tell you that the lands on which I live and work are the original homelands of the Haudenosaunee, and I honor the sovereignty of the 6 nations, the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and Tuscarora. I strive to honor as well as respect the diverse Indigenous peoples that are connected to these lands, with gratitude for the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. It is my pleasure to be with you this evening, and I'm going to admit that I've been getting lots of help during my course from Joseph Francis, and now Iman is going to help me, and I'm going to share my screen and hope for the best. And so far, I think we've got something approaching a success, perhaps.
Yes, yes.
You see that.
Yes.
So we have there a title. You will be happy, I think, to know that I'll be using the slides for just a few minutes of my presentation for a reason that's going to become very obvious. So allow me to begin with an anecdote about a brief exchange between a friend's parents. My friend Megan's dad, a school superintendent by day, was nevertheless given to some, how shall I say it, well, salty language at home. And Megan recalls how when he was getting ready to do the dishes, he would holler out, "Helen, where's the joy?" And if she didn't get a quick response, he'd say, "Helen, where's the damn joy?" This anecdote always makes Megan laugh, and it makes me laugh as well. Richard was looking for dishwashing detergent, but his question has some universal resonance. Indeed, aren't we all asking the same question? Where is the joy? That question has gained currency these days, as evidenced by the widespread study and interest in joy. A prime example is the Theology of Joy and the Good Life Project at Yale Center for Faith and Culture, founded and led by theologian and this week faculty member at Vancouver School of Theology, Professor Miroslav Volf. The purpose of the project, as stated on the website, is building a transformative movement driven by a Christian articulation of the joy that attends the flourishing human life. And in an additional paragraph, there's an explanation of the fact that the joy has been at the and its cultivation has been at the center of Jewish and Christian scriptures, theology, and practices. It seems to have faded from theological scrutiny in more recent years. Notwithstanding its importance to human well-being and deep ancient religious foundations for understanding and cultivating joy, the very idea of joy has all but disappeared from modern theological reflection, is all but ignored by the social sciences, and is increasingly absent from lived experience. The consequence of the statement reads, is a flattening out, a graying of human life and communities, abundance of entertainment notwithstanding, and a sharp bloom of individual and communal dysfunction. I invite you to explore that website because I think you will find it interesting if the topic has brought you to this lecture tonight. The consultation, held several years ago, gave rise to several books, one of which is Joy and Human Flourishing, edited by Professor Volf and Justin Crisp. Another is The Gravity of Joy by Angela Williams Gorel. A third, and I named just a few, is Joy, 100 Poems, edited by Christian Wyman. Some of you might also know the Book of Joy, Lasting Happiness in a Changing World, by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, together with Douglas Abrams. That book was published in 2016. And if you want to know what joy can look like, be sure to check out the trailers, the YouTube clips of the two of them laughing, joking, dancing about, their faces radiant with joy. I turned to the theme of joy in Merton's life and writings quite by chance, as I was reading, or shall I say, rereading, New Seeds of Contemplation and Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. As is frequently the case for me, and perhaps for you as well, when I'm revisiting a book of Merton's that I think I know really well, I discover lines that I've never noticed before. The lines seem to jump off the page, fresh and new. I am, if I may borrow the title of C.S. Lewis's conversion account, surprised by joy again and again. I need some assistance. I seem to have a frozen screen. Let us see. I'm trying to move to my next slide.
You can see the arrow on your keyboard.
Yes, I do. And that's what I've been pushing to no avail.
Yeah, we still see.
Are you able to do it from your end with the copy I sent you?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Well, we'll do that. And remember all those things that Merton said about technology. I think most of them are true.
Yep. So I can help you.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
That would be wonderful. And if you go to the second screen, the second slide. So I found there the lines that jumped out at me. In New Seeds of Contemplation, you were created for joy. That is the phrasing in Seeds of Contemplation. And in New Seeds, Merton proclaims you were created for spiritual joy. And then in reading Conjectures of the Guilty Bystander, in a prayer to God the Father on the Vigil of Pentecost, I read this: you have made us together. You have made us one and many. You have placed me here in the midst as witness, as awareness, and as joy. Here I am. In me, the world is present, and you are present. Joy, that word again. I was hooked, drawn to joy in much the same way that a few years ago I was drawn to the word mercy, inspired by Pope Francis and his proclamation of a year of mercy. And so then mercy became a lens through which I began to read and reflect on Merton's life and writings. Now that lens has become joy. And that is how I came to learn about the Yale Project and discovered that many others today are looking for what we can learn about joy and what joy has to teach us about being truly human together. And this is how I came to be teaching a course at VST this week called Created for Joy, Merton's Spirituality of Awareness and Witness. A fair warning, once you begin to focus on a word or theme like mercy or joy, you see it everywhere, popping up in scripture and prayer, in conversation, in readings, and for me, in Merton's life and work. Sometimes overtly so, sometimes as subtle or maybe not so subtle hint. Be forewarned, joy will enter into your imagination and stick like glue, sparking you to wonder, question, and I think this is the best part, experience life in new ways. So let us move to slide 3, if we could, Iman. This evening, I'm going to be focusing on Merton's call to joy. And I've thought of his legacies in terms of calls before. Judith mentioned the book that I prepared, the anthology of Merton's writings for Orbis, in which I organized the book according to three calls: a call to contemplation, a call to compassion, and a call to unity. But I think Merton issues a loud and clear call to joy. In a message to poets, which he wrote for a group of young poets in Mexico in 1964, he puts it this way. He says, "Come, dervishes, here is the water of life, dance in it." And in another text, in the last chapter of New Seeds of Contemplation, that invitation to dance comes once again. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but I would like to ask you to come along with me in your imagination and in viewing the slides that Iman is going to show you, in actually recognizing that though the water of life is metaphor, I want to take that image somewhat literally and see if it surfaces for us some experiences of joy. Slide 4, please, Iman. So I begin with an acknowledgement that this slide and the next two are photographs that my friend and former professor at Rosemont College and fellow colleague in Merton Studies, Jenny Radigan, took from her television screen. And these are photos of the Kennedy Center honors. And they were broadcast just a few weeks ago, pandemic style, in a way that left me breathless and filled me with delight. But when I look at these slides, they have a beauty of their own, a little bit of that impressionistic view that is suggestive of the scene that so excited me. So students of two of the honorees, actor and director and choreographer Debbie Allen and virtuoso violinist Midori Goto, came together to make music and dance. As the violinists played soulfully, dancers moved rhythmically in the reflecting pool. What a glorious experience, hearing and seeing these talented young people full of grace and beauty, all feeling the music in their bodies and making us feel it too. Sparkling sprays of water, and you might move to the next slide, catching the light, shining like diamonds. It was as if the water was dancing too, living water. And the next slide. Come, dance in the water of life. I heard these young people calling, and I wanted to. Next slide. And I also thank Jenny and her daughter Beth for the next three slides that you're going to see, that brought together some other water memories in my life. Perhaps you too stomped and twirled in puddles. Tabitha here is very ready for the puddles to be formed, and she's got her umbrella out to prove it. The bigger and the deeper the puddles, the better. The pure joy of splashing about. I can still see myself skipping through puddles with my favorite doll, who wore a red raincoat and red boots on these outings. Now I dare say that I, and perhaps many of you, avoid stepping in the puddles. We might get our shoes wet. Worse yet, we fear, and probably not without good reason, that we might slip and fall. So we enjoy watching the little ones play, next slide, in the rain or on the shore. And if we enter into their moment, we can taste their joy. So Beatrice and Tabitha here. And next slide, please. And sometimes we remember those days at the shore, at the ocean, with the waves whipping up, in which the puddle was immense indeed. And we were surrounded by that water and ready to dance, ready to enjoy every bit of that moment. There's something wondrous and liberating, and yes, joyful about dancing in water, just the idea of it, isn't there? But thankfully, we don't need the Kennedy Center reflecting pool or the ocean or lake or pool or puddle to dance in the water of life. We can dance wherever we are, whether we get wet or not. Dancing knows no bounds of time or place. We can dance on city streets, on country fields, in kitchens, on ships, in discos, in places of worship, cheek to cheek, in rounds, sometimes all alone. Merton confessed dancing in the Hermitage, and I couldn't help thinking whether that was perhaps the Trappist trot. And even when our bodies refuse to dance, we dance in our hearts, for we humans are dancers at heart. Iman, I have finished with the slides. Thank you so much. But we'll take a peek at this last one before we close out, and we'll carry on from there. I was asking what you saw. You saw joy, delight, freedom, spontaneity, ordinariness. And though you couldn't hear it, either you couldn't hear the violins playing, nor the shouts of joy, the music and the laughter are often there. And in those experiences, we are taken out of ourselves. We become children. We have a taste again of paradise. So we might say that Merton is inviting us to jump into life, immerse ourselves in it, and not hold back. And I'm reminded of something that David Stendhal Rost wrote. When I'm grateful, he says, I am neither rushing nor slouching through my day. I'm dancing. What is true in dance class is true here too. Only when you forget to think of your steps do you truly dance. And as witnesses to joy tell us, it's only when you forget yourself, when you shift your focus outside yourself, that you experience joy. Dancing is the mark of a freed, free, and freeing spirit, awake to the wonders of the moment. And here I'm remembering a poem by Trappist Sister Miriam Pollard, a poem entitled Banquet of Joy, inspired by a passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, beginning at verse 30. And the evangelist writes, great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the maimed, the blind, the mute, and many others. They put them at his feet, and he cured them, so that the crowd was amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed whole, the lame walking, and blind seeing, and they praised the God of Israel. What follows is the feeding of the 4,000. But what happens in between the healing and the feeding? As Miriam imagines the scene, there is dancing, and Jesus joins into the dance. And I begin reading in the middle of the poem, knowing that you will be able to easily find it, Banquet of Joy, just by Googling that title and Sister Miriam Pollard's name. And all the while, there he sits in dignity, unassailable. Or does he? What really happened is that Jesus, around whose feet washed up this scene of human misery, did not just cure, he did not just sit on his rock and wave away the disabilities. He dropped his august dignity like a worn out coat there beside the rock on which he sat. He joined the jig of the once lamed, hopped and clapped and beat the time. He sang bass with a barbershop quartet of the once mute and stooped to yield his shoulders to the tiny bodies of children once wan with impending death. He joined in a round dance with happy mothers and set up a botany class with the once blind. Then, when they eventually got too tired to keep carrying on, they all sat down to a banquet of fish and bread. Imagine that. From hurting to healing, from cure to celebration, from mourning to dancing, from dance to banquet, a banquet of thanksgiving. Imagine many such themes, such scenes of thanksgiving and jubilation. Imagine them in your own life. Notice the dancers around you. Imagine yourself dancing in all the ways you are able to dance. Remember, there is something of Beatrice and Tabitha and Eva, whom we saw at the ocean, and something of Merton, and something of the joyful Jesus in you. Come, let us dance in the water of life. So to stay with the water metaphor, let's just dive a little bit deeper into that invitation, because there's more to it than first meets the eye. The invitation to dance in the water of life is an invitation to experience life joyfully, to taste deep joy. This becomes clear in the last chapter of Merton's New Seeds that I mentioned earlier. The general dance, as it's titled, is a metaphor for divine action. God makes the world in order that God might descend into the world, that God in God's self might become man, Merton writes. At the time he was finishing New Seeds, Merton wrote to tell his friend and Shaker scholar, Edward Deming Andrews, that he had run across a lovely old carol about the dancing of God with man in the mystery of the incarnation. Continues, I think there may be an important lead. The carol is an ancient English one. In it, the Lord speaks of his coming at Christmas in the following words, tomorrow is my dancing day. The hymn tells Christ's story from incarnation to ascension, ending with this verse, then up to heaven did I ascend, where now I dwell in sure substance on the right hand of God, that man may come unto the general dance. The general dance is all about incarnation. And here I quote Merton, the Lord would not only love his creation as a father, but he would enter into his creation, emptying himself, hiding himself, as if he were not God, but a creature. So God became man. He took on the weakness and ordinariness of man, and he hid himself, becoming an anonymous and unimportant man in a very unimportant place. And he refused at any time to lord it over men, or to be a king, or to be a leader, or to be a reformer, or to be in any way superior to his own creatures. He would be nothing else than their brother and their counselor and their servant and their friend, the hidden one, unknown, unremarkable, vulnerable. He can be killed. And when the Son of Man was put to death, he rose again from the dead and was again with us. The incarnation is not only about the God-man, not only about God in flesh, incarnate. It is also about each of us. For Merton reminds us that in becoming human, God became not only Jesus Christ, but also potentially every man and woman that ever existed. In Christ, Merton writes, God became not only this man, but also in a broader and more mystical sense, yet no less truly, every man, every human. This is the mystery of the incarnation in which we are invited to enter. We are able to decide then, as Merton tells us, whether we ourselves and that portion of the world which is ours shall become aware of God's presence, consecrated by it, and transfigured in its light. We're able to decide whether we will become God's epiphany, manifesting God's presence in this world. And if we believe in the incarnation of the Son of God, there should be no one on earth, Merton says, in whom we are not prepared to see the mystery and the presence of Christ, including ourselves. And in so doing, we join in the general dance of creation, experiencing the cosmic joy, the joy of the cosmic dance, which Merton tells us is always there. So I share all of this with you because I think that Merton illuminates our humanity through his reflection on the mystery of the incarnation. Remember his experience in Fourth and Walnut. Could not be a Merton talk without citing that experience, right? He said, I have the immense joy of being man, and we would say today of being human, a member of a race in which God's self becomes incarnate. As if the sorrows and stupidities of the human condition could overwhelm me, now I realize what we all are. And if only everybody could realize this, but it can't be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. So from this, we move to realize and to celebrate, and I dare say give thanks for the fact that joy is vocation and it is mission. Joy is every Christian's vocation and mission. Joy is everyone's vocation and mission. So let's take a few moments to unpack that idea of vocation and mission or work. Remember, I began by saying that Merton wrote that we are created for joy. It matters to me, and I think to all of us, that Merton makes this point in a book on contemplation. The joy of which Merton speaks is the fruit of contemplation. That is the awakening to and living in the awareness of God's presence within our world, within ourselves, within all of humanity. So liberated from what Merton calls the prison of the false self, we enter into God's joy. We participate in the very life of the triune God. Merton puts it this way: the three selves of God are three subsistent relations of selflessness, overflowing and superabounding in joy in the gift of their one life. Our joy and our life are destined to be nothing but a participation in the life that is theirs. In them, we will one day live entirely in God and in one another as the persons of God live in one another. We are created, we are made for joy. We are called to be who we are to experience that joy. So true joy is found in becoming who we are, in Merton speak, becoming our true selves, the selves that we are in God. And for that, God plants seeds for our self-discovery. The seeds of God's love and self-discovery are sown, Merton tells us, in new seeds in every event and every moment, in the sun that warms me, in the cold rain. It is God who breathes on me with light winds off the river and in the breezes out of the woods. His love spreads the shade of the sycamore tree over my head. It is God's love that speaks to me in the birds and streams, but also behind the clamor of the city. And then if these seeds, so generously, graciously strewn, take root in our liberty, Merton writes, if his will would grow in my freedom, I would become the love he is, and my harvest would be his glory and my own joy. God's seeds bear a harvest of joy and hope as we become ever more who God created us to be. And that joy of God is everywhere. How else could Pope Francis say joy is the air we breathe? We live in a world that Merton tells us is absolutely transparent, his words, and God is shining through all the time. Merton tells us that God manifests himself everywhere, in everything, in people and in things and in nature and in events and so forth. So it becomes very obvious, Merton insists, that God is everywhere. God is in everything, and we cannot be without God. But there are moments when the veil is lifted and we see what is always there. And often that is in the most ordinary. And so I quote a passage from the last chapter of New Seeds from the General Dance that I especially am moved by and think you will be too. When we are alone on a starlit night, when by chance we see the migrating birds in autumn descending on a grove of junipers to rest and eat, when we see children in a moment when they really are children, when we love in our own hearts, or when, like the Japanese poet Basho, we hear an old frog land in a quiet pond with a solitary splash. At such times, the awakening, the turning inside of all values, the newness, the emptiness and purity of vision that make themselves evident, provide us a glimpse of the cosmic dance. The simple and the ordinary draws us into the deep, into deep joy. We move beyond the boundaries of our own skin and our own concerns to recognize that we are a part of a great whole of God's creation. And at such moments and in such movements, we sense that we are one that we are already one. They can also be moments in which we realize our mission of mending a broken world, resetting our common body of broken bones, ever mindful of our brothers and sisters, especially those finding themselves in troubled waters, and resolving to work in the healing, the inclusion, and the love. Why? Because God's joy overflows, and so it must. Just as God's joy overflows into creation, so we are called to let our joy, our hope, our courage overflow. If you have read Pope Francis's new book, Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future, you may remember that he says we need to break through the barriers that wall us in, mentally and physically, to, and I quote Pope Francis, burst the ways of our thinking and living that not only separate us from one another, but actively divide us, something that has become so apparent in these crises of multiple pandemics, hunger and climate change among the hidden pandemics. It's a time of reckoning. It's a time of trial, but it's also a time of kairos, when God asks us to create something new. And Pope Francis reminds us that mercy breaks out at such overflow moments, bursting out and breaking the traditional confines that have kept so many people from what they deserve, shaking up our roles and our thinking. And he says, I see an overflow of mercy spilling out in our midst. Well, I would add to that, where mercy overflows, there is hope. Where mercy overflows, there is joy, and the joy must overflow. So you might say that our vocation and mission is to become ministers of the overflow, ministers of mercy and joy. For joy, and the same goes for mercy, are not given to us for ourselves alone. Joy is not given for us for ourselves any more than solitude or faith or hope or love. All are to be shared. I've shared here some of what Merton says about joy, but to read Merton, especially his journals and letters, is to experience something of his joy. Joy in the ordinary delights he enjoyed in the monastery and in the hermitage, in silence, solitude, and prayer, in the company of birds and critters of all sorts, in friendships that sustained his spirit, and in all the secret gifts and graces bestowed on him by a God who beckons each of us to join the cosmic dance and rejoice. And where is the joy? It is around us and in us. It is everywhere. It is God's joy surprising us again and again with splashes of grace. And so, my friends, I end with Merton's words of blessing to young Grace Sisson, who shared her drawings with him, one of which was The Road to Joy. The blessing Merton shared with Grace, I hope that you and I together will secretly travel our own road to joy, which is mysteriously revealed to us without our exactly recognizing it. When I say this, I don't want you to start thinking about it. You already know it without thinking about it. Thank you. And thank you for letting me share some of my favorite Merton through that lens of joy.
Friends, this would be the moment where if we were together in person, we would be applauding. And so I don't see a reaction button that lets me put the applause or the thumbs up or the part. That's what I would be doing if we were together, and what you would be doing too. So we have some folks with some hands raised. The best way to get a question to me is to put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A, please. And then by the way, I'm Jason Biasi, and I teach preaching at VST, and I'm going to curate these questions and relay them to Christine. Christine, thank you for your joy tonight as you presented Merton to us, and as you have to your students here at VST all week. After I'm done relaying questions, Michael Higgins will thank you for the lecture and offer a concluding word. So I want to start with the ones we already had in the chat. And this first question is from Jun Ki Kim. I've had an interest in the teachings of Buddhism.
Exactly how it happened.
Sorry?
I have lost my screen. I have found it.
Good.
So what was lost has been found.
So,
and there is joy. Remember those parables. They are the very best. And you never rejoice alone.
Very good. So here's the first question, Christine. I have had an interest in the teachings of Buddhism about how to understand the idea of the human self. Along with the mystical experience in downtown Louisville, it seems that phrases to forget oneself, to be out of oneself in order to live in joy, can open up diverse possibilities between Merton's theology and teachings from Buddhism about the human self. Can you share your thoughts about the relation between Buddhism and Merton's theology? Is there a particular book or books by Merton which can help me to have a substantial understanding about this topic?
What a wonderful question. Clearly we know that for a very long time, Merton was not only reading Buddhism and Buddhist and Eastern wisdom, but really letting it saturate his understanding of himself, of his experience of the world. I think probably if I were making a recommendation for reading, it would be Mystics and Zen. On Eastern meditation, maybe on Eastern contemplation. I'm not remembering the title. Maybe somebody will remember it, but that is certainly another resource. The forgetting of self in order to discover self becomes the illustration in Merton, as in the Buddhist tradition, as in the koans of paradox, of the both and. The way to discovery is the way of forgetting, of transcending, of moving beyond self. And of course, for Merton, even his ideas of true self, false self, as these develop, already are present in his thinking in the early seeds of contemplation in 49, but certainly enriched by his thinking and his continued reading and reflection on Buddhist texts.
Christine, we actually lost your feed for just a moment. So could you repeat the names of those two books, please? Because I don't think any of us got them.
Yes. Well, one is Mystics and Zen Masters.
Okay. Thank you.
And well, yes, that is one of the books, but Zen and the Birds of Appetite is one of the book, another of the books. And then the third is a small collection by Bonnie Thurston on, perhaps it's called On Eastern Meditation. It's small in size, and there's a companion on contemplation edited by Paul Pearson.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. And I'll put those in the chat. And I'll relay to you a second question if you are ready for me.
I am.
Okay, and this is from a participant who had to sign off, but they promised they would be reading New Seeds tonight. So they're going right to the source. Here's the question. What if you are overwhelmed with grief and oppressed by depression? I know I was created for joy. So the grief and depression are that much more painful.
Yeah. I'm going to say two things in response to that, because one has to do with, or one of my comments, with the disposition, with our, with what we might call personality orientation. And I think of somebody like the Dalai Lama or Desmond Tutu, and an effusiveness that just naturally bubbles up. Well, we are not all that person. When I think about grief and joy, I remember a poem by Mary Oliver entitled, a very short poem, "We Shake with Joy." And she writes, "We shake with joy, we shake with grief. What a time they have, these two, housed as they are in the same body." And I think about that, and then I also think about one of the comments made in that Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And I'm forgetting who of the two said this. "The path to joy, like with sadness, does not lead away from suffering and adversity, but through it." And so I think we know and find it difficult to find the words to say that on occasion we glimpse that suffering can coexist with joy. And yet sometimes the burden, the darkness, the pain is so intense that joy fades behind a veil, as it were. I understand the question better than I feel I can answer it. But I know that we all, at some point in our life, struggle with the grief and the joy housed in the body that is us.
Thank you very much. Here's another question, Craig Proctor. Do you think Merton's concept of joy anticipates elements of Matthew Fox' creation spirituality? Fox titles emphasizing joy spring to mind, one for children, one on Aquinas, one called Sheer Joy.
Yeah, and coexisting with that idea really of what I remember of Matthew Fox, whom I haven't read for a long time, but Original Blessing. And certainly the resonance between that sense and we find the tone of the general dance, that chapter that I was referring to in New Seeds. Yes, I see the resonance. Thank you for that question.
Very good. Thank you. I'm wondering if any of our panelists wants to ask Dr. Bochen a question.
Christine, please.
Christine, Judith or Richard or Michael, is there something that you find yourself pondering? Michael, as a fellow journalist, you and I are both in that tribe that buys ink by the barrel. And so the proverb says one should not pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Christine has not picked a fight with anyone tonight. She has picked a dance. But we'll get to hear from you in just a moment. Christine, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that tonight I was presenting a dimension of Merton that coexists and a set of convictions and a view that coexists with other wisdom and other insight. So this is the person who has also, Merton is the person who has also been mindful of the capacity of human beings to do harm to one another, of the evil that is perpetrated by human beings. Merton is the person who wrote chant to be used in processions around a site with furnaces, who reflected deeply and long on the Holocaust, on the use of the atomic bomb, on the nature and the possibility that humans may come to destroy all of humanity through action, through their own action. So there is not, in highlighting this aspect of Merton's witness to joy, I don't want to suggest that comes without an equally profound grasp of the challenges of human life, human suffering, and the challenges of evil. In the same book that he can write about the glory of the cosmic dance, he also invites us to think about the body of broken bones, the human body, the body of Christ, broken again and again by war, by genocide, by torture, and describes that as limb torn from limb. So it seems only right, if one had more time, to address that other dimension, but it's there. And maybe that's why what Merton has to say to us about joy speaks so deeply to our hearts and to our minds, because we know that he's not speaking of an invitation to La La Land. He's not speaking of, everything is sweet and wonderful. And no, here's somebody that knows well the whole of the human experience. And I would say that that's the meaning of the incarnation as well, because this is a God who enters fully into that experience of humanity, even unto death.
Mm-hmm.
Judith, I see that you've, thank you, Christine. Judith, I see you've unmuted yourself. Did you want to ask something?
No, I was just going to say that joy and sorrow exist simultaneously, and I think Christine gave good examples of that just now, particularly. So that's all I was going to say. I couldn't find the button. Anyway.
Thank you, Judith. We do have a couple of versions of this question, so I think I'll ask it as the final one and then let Michael have our last word for the night. And one questioner asks it with particular brevity, and it relates to your comments just now, Christine. In a time of collective trauma, mass graves found, pandemics, climate change, how do we preach joy?
Yeah, we do it. We do it in light of the promise of life that is the resurrection. We do it recognizing that there is sadness, there is grief, there is loss, there is pain. Acknowledging that, but for the Christian, the story does not end at the cross. And my work is in a classroom, so I don't face that question standing at a pulpit. But I certainly have had those conversations, as we all have, with friends who are experiencing the joy and the anger and the frustration. And in the US, I feel that so very, very keenly in terms of the experience of my Black and brown brothers and sisters, and what has been happening day after day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. So in many ways, words fail at those moments, and we can embrace each other in hope, and in hope that the cross is not the end. And I'll ask my students tomorrow, some of whom are preparing for ministry, how they might respond. I won't put Reverend Hardcastle on the spot right now. But I thank you for those questions, and I thank you for that for the need to see the whole of the picture, not just a part.
Thank you, Christine. And friends, I want to point out to you the comment in the chat from Paul. Can you guys see this? Yeah, it's to all attendees. So join us for Lynn Sabo speaking on poetry, a spiritual direction with Thomas Merton and Denise Levertov, July 13th, 8 p.m. Eastern. And then there's a web address at which to register. Christine, thank you for your work tonight. Thank you for your work this week at the Vancouver School of Theology with us in this lecture and with your students. And I'd like to hand it over to Michael Higgins for a final word. But Michael, are you unmuted? You've got to unmute yourself. There you are.
Here I am. That's right. I've never had a final word. It's always been a final paragraph. I just want to say that this was a wonderful night. It's great to spend some time again with Christine. We've known each other for decades. We've been involved in the Merton industry, as it's called, for quite a long period of time. So you might think that there would be nothing fresh and new to hear, but you would be wrong, because that's one of the strengths of Christine's analysis of Merton. She may be a major part of the Merton industry, but she doesn't relate to him as an industry. She relates to him as a man, as a thinker, as a poet. And as a consequence, she uncovers various aspects of his life that can resonate with our own. And one of those dimensions, of course, is joy, because in many ways, the penultimate, well, not penultimate, but the ultimate symbol of Christianity is the empty tomb. And the empty tomb, of course, shimmers with joy. So it was wonderful to hear you tonight, to take us down some paths perhaps we've trodden in the past, but to give us some new insights. But it's also been a strange night for me, full of synchronicity, full of symmetry, and a certain weirdness, I have to say. Christine's been on my mind for several weeks now. And the reason for that is I've been watching her doppelganger on the British-Irish series called Line of Duty. It's a 6-year, multi-part, wonderfully conceived and brilliantly executed police procedural. Now, Christine's doppelganger is Superintendent Carmichael, is very unlike Christine. First of all, she's utterly joyless. She never smiles. She's ruthless in her pursuit of what she perceives as corruption. And she's the absolute antithesis of Christine Bochen. But every time I watch her, and she dominated series 6, I thought of Christine. And so when she popped up tonight on the screen, I thought, yeah, that's not Carmichael. That's the authentic Christine Bochen. Thank God for that. Now my nightmares will end. Carmichael may be joyless, but Christine does exude joy, and you see it in several different ways. The glimmers of joy and the shimmerings of joy that you find in her reflections on Merton. And one of them that I especially enjoyed, and that's the reason why I referred to the symmetry and synchronicity, is the cosmic dance, the concluding chapter of New Seeds of Contemplation. And the reason for that is, some of you may remember this, some of you may not know it, but way back in 1978, the first major international conference in Thomas Merton that set the template for subsequent conferences was held here at the University of British Columbia and at the Vancouver School of Theology. There were about 170, 180 scholars and participants from all around. There came many of them who knew Merton. Many of them were still, it was 10 years after Merton's death, so many of them were present. And at the end of the conference went for the traditional 3 days. Donald Grayston and I were the coordinators of the conference. I was the one carrying a crushing load of gravitas. Those of you will know Donald is that he had the ebullience of a clown. And what he wanted to do at the end was to have everyone hold hands in the general dance, take it from metaphor to lived reality at the Vancouver School of Theology. So here were all these stuffy academics, would-be academics manqué, academics in the making, all gathered there, and Donald inviting us to enter into the cosmic dance and to do that physically. I was deeply unsettled in my own skin about it, but afterwards I realized that it was a stunningly effective way to end the conference. And years later, many senior academics would often remark to me that it was a conference unlike any other academic conference they had ever attended, because it brought the mind and the spirit and the body into play. And that for all its heavy thinking, there was an undercurrent or substratum of joy. That seems to me what Merton was about. And in no small part, it's what Christine was about tonight, in bringing this aspect of Merton's thought into relief and to remind us that it's there for our reading. So thank you, Christine, and wonderful to see you again.
Michael, thank you so much. Christine, thank you so much. Friends, thank you for being with us. Every blessing and good night.
Good night now.